Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. Yes, Roger's Cheap Old Book Club returns in 2026, which is right now, Roger. Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, which is the cheapest book club around, everything in Roger's Cheap Old Book Club is available for free on Project Gutenberg. You can't get better than free. That's about as cheap as you can get, buddy. So yes, Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, which always begins in February. Roger worked hard on this list, and so we're going to talk about the choices. And yes, it's still Christmassy here at Stately Vaughan Manor. The lady of the manor says the 12 days of Christmas are still going on. So it's still Christmas. Who knew? Apparently it is. So, in the festive holiday spirit, let's talk about Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, which starts next month with The Son of the Wolf by Jack London. The Son of the Wolf by Jack London. I think all of these books as physical books, except one. And one I've had as an ebook for a while. But I didn't feel like running around and finding them all, so I'm just going to use Roger's magic powers to make them float up here in the air. Your sorcery is amazing, Roger. So yes, The Son of the Wolf by Jack London. This was chosen for a couple of reasons. First of all, this I think is Jack London's first short story collection. I could be wrong about that, but I think it might be. And these are Klondike stories. And Jack London, the other reason is that Jack London just isn't read enough anymore. And Jack London is an incredible writer. And recently, I've come to discover that a lot of people not only don't read Jack London anymore, but they don't know who Jack London is, which is kind of crazy. But sadly true. So, Roger and I will do what we can to promote Jack London this year because his books are really, really good. Starting with Roger's Cheap Old Book Club and The Son of the Wolf, a collection of Jack London stories. I think that's a fantastic way to start off Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. So yeah, we're going to be talking about that in February. And then in March, we're going to be talking about Micah Clarke by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which is one of Doyle's historical novels. Doyle, of course, is most popularly associated with his greatest character, Sherlock Holmes. But Doyle himself preferred his historical novels. Nobody else did. But Doyle did. Micah Clarke is a book. I found it at Pegasus Books years ago. I already had it as an ebook because I have all of his books as ebooks. But I found a physical copy of this years ago at Pegasus and meant to read it right away and did not. So now is the time to read Micah Clarke. I really don't know much about it, actually. Other that it's an historical novel and there's some kind of war stuff going on. But that's about it. So we will find out about this book together. But it's probably going to be really good because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a heck of a writer. That brings us to April and The Avenger by Edgar Wallace. The Avenger by Edgar Wallace. I recently got a paperback version of this in my big Christmas epic box full of gifts. And that was from, of course, my good friend, the International Man of Mystery, who every year sends me a big Christmas box. And he always sends me Edgar Wallace, and I always intend to read Edgar Wallace and just never get around to it for some reason. But this year, I'm going to be reading The Avenger, which I think has something to do with a guy running around chopping people's heads off, Roger. So very Roger-like behavior going on in this book. Edgar Wallace used to be a very, very popular writer, but I never hear about him anymore, ever, on BookTube or anyplace else. So we are going to read Edgar Wallace in April with The Avenger. That's going to be interesting. Which brings us to May, Dracula's Guest by Bram Stoker. I've talked about this before. In fact, I did a whole video on Dracula's Guest, probably a couple of them, because I think I read Dracula's Guest once, badly. But this is an excellent collection of short stories from Bram Stoker. Considered by many to be his best book other than Dracula is this collection of short stories. And I have a Penguin edition of this, which also has The Lair of the White Worm in it, which was not so good from what I remember. But I'm going to read them both again in May, because in May is actually Horror Mayhem. What a coincidence that you chose a book of short stories, short horror stories for Horror Mayhem. Dracula's Guest. It's awesome. Of course, everybody knows Dracula, but Dracula's Guest is a book that not so many people have read. So let's all read it together. Dracula's Guest. Fantastic collection of stories. Then it's June, To the Last Man by Zane Grey. This book just has an awesome title. And Zane Grey has not disappointed me yet. Of course, June will be the fantastic time of June on the Range when we all read Westerns. And I always read a Zane Grey book, and this one happens to be in the public domain. So yeah, we're reading To the Last Man, which I know nothing about, other than that it's a Western and it sounds really cool because, you know, it's To the Last Man. So there's got to be some stuff going on in this book. Like I say, Zane Grey always delivers. And I haven't been disappointed yet with the Zane Grey book. So I'm looking forward to June and To the Last Man. Which brings us to July and The Time Traders by Andre Norton. I do have a paperback copy of this somewhere. Hopefully I find it by June. So Andre Norton is a writer I've intended to read more of in 2026, and this seems like a good thing to read because, remarkably, The Time Traders is on Project Gutenberg for free, as are some of her other books. Of course, Andre Norton wrote a million books. I mean, she wrote so much. And I only read one Andre Norton book in 2025, but I loved it. And it reminded me just how good she is. And not enough people read Andre Norton anymore. For some reason. I'm not exactly sure why. But she wrote some excellent stuff. I believe I've read The Time Traders before, but looking back, I'm thinking maybe I didn't. Maybe I read one of the sequels because I think this was a series. I might have read another Time Traders book. I can't remember. But when June comes along, when July comes along, we're reading this in July, I will find out. Of course, July is the time of Rocket Summer, a celebration of classic science fiction. I believe The Time Traders was written in the 1950s, although I could be wrong. But yes, it will be the time of Rocket Summer, a celebration of classic science fiction. Excellent choice for that time, Roger, for your cheap old book club. This brings us to August with The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. One of Robert Louis Stevenson's lesser-known books, The Black Arrow. I did read this once before, years and years ago, and I remember not liking it as much as the other books I had read by Robert Louis Stevenson up to that point. But it's been a long time since I've read this book, and so I think it's about time I reevaluate it and see what I think about it now, because I think I was just probably a teenager when I read this. Probably. Like I said, it's been a while. It's been a minute since I've been a teenager. So I will reevaluate The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. Not an unknown book, certainly, but one of his lesser-known books. And not one you see in print anymore. That's true about a lot of classic authors, though. You know, they all write a bunch of stuff and only one or two books make it into constant reprints. And this one is not one that made it. But available for free on Project Gutenberg. And you can get print copies of this, although they'll probably be print-on-demand copies. Then, September, The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. I always intend to read more Agatha Christie. She's so popular. This is a book you can get new, I'm fairly certain. It was the first Poirot novel. Am I saying that correctly? Poirot, I think. My French isn't so good. But he's eaten a few French people, so he might speak it better than me. But this is the first one, I believe, isn't it? The Mysterious Affair at Styles, available for free on Project Gutenberg. And you could probably get fancy pants editions of this book too. So this is a popular book because Agatha Christie is a popular writer. But yeah, we always intend to read more Agatha Christie, so now's a good chance. So we threw her up in the book club with The Mysterious Affair at Styles. Which brings us to October. Can Such Things Be by Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce, who is best known now for Disappearing, wrote some great stuff. He wrote a lot of fiction that took place during the Civil War. He wrote a lot of war stories. And he also wrote horror stories. He also wrote tall tales. And probably best known now for The Devil's Dictionary, actually. And there is a Library of America edition of Bierce now. So you can get his stuff. I do have a couple big Bierce anthologies, and one of them has Can Such Things Be in it. This is kind of a legendary collection of dark stories and horror stories. And most of what I've read from Bierce has been in anthologies. You know, he's anthologized a lot in horror collections. And so this is a good opportunity to read an actual collection, a whole collection of his work. And he's really, really good. Very influential writer, Ambrose Bierce. And he did vanish. That's what he's best known for, vanishing in Mexico. Probably got himself into some trouble, you know. But Roger and I have seen From Dusk Till Dawn 3, so we know exactly what happened to Ambrose Bierce. Which brings us to November, and Vendetta, A Story of One Forgotten by Mary Corelli, who was a best-selling author at one time. Not respected at all by the, literary establishment and critics. Very unusual woman. She was a bit eccentric, this one, but very popular. She wrote, like I said, a lot of popular bestsellers. Very, from what I understand, very romantic, melodramatic dramas and romances and things like that. And I've never read any of her books. I have. This is I think the only book which I don't think I have a physical copy of this. But I've had a bunch of her books as ebooks for a while. And I've always felt like, I should probably check her out to see why she was so popular. Again, like I said, she was considered in her time a trashy writer. She was writing Garbogust books, basically, back in the day. Which sounds like fun. And this book, Vendetta, A Story of One Forgotten, is, I believe, a book of revenge and infidelity and all kinds of cool stuff. So it sounds like fun anyway. We'll find out in November. So in December, we're closing out the book club with The Monk, a romance by Matthew Gregory Lewis about a naughty, naughty monk. He was very naughty, Roger. Did all kinds of naughty stuff. This was an extremely popular Gothic novel. Full of the naughtiness that this monk gets himself into. And I have read this once before, again, years and years ago. I must have been probably 27 or 28 when I read this book. And that was a long time ago. So I've intended to get back to this book for years because, I've never talked about the book on my channel just because I always felt like it's been too long since I've read it. And I don't remember enough about it, except that it was a hell of a lot of fun. So, yeah, that's all I remember about it. It was really good. I remember that. And I remember finding it kind of shocking, some of the stuff that goes on in this book. But, probably not so much. Maybe just so for the time. I don't know. I'll tell you, though, in December, We're gonna have a long wait for The Monk, but it'll be worth it when we get there. So The Monk by Matthew Gregory Lewis, that'll be a hell of a lot of fun. And that's the whole book club for 2026. It's going to be awesome. Join along with us, Roger and I, because like I said, man, you can get all these books really, really cheap, as in for nothing, if you don't mind reading on an e-reader. You know, if you're one of those folks who's just like physical books only, man, you can get these books physically, thanks to the services of many print-on-demand outfits. Yeah, all these books you can get physical copies of. I cannot vouch for the quality of some of them, but you can get them physically. But, you know, free is probably better, Roger. Free is pretty much always better. Okay, guys, that's all for today. I will probably not see you tomorrow. We have to go up to the Rustic Vaughan Lodge, which I hear is very wet at this time because it's raining a lot. So I probably will see you from up there if all goes according to plan. Okay, I will catch you next time.